It was raining that evening, not the kind of soft, gentle rain that made you want to stay inside with hot tea, but a loud, angry storm that whipped at rooftops and soaked everything it touched. The clouds were dark, heavy, and restless. The streets of Elmridge were nearly empty except for a girl sitting on the front steps of the town library. Her name was Talia. She was 17, with long black hair tied into a low ponytail. A white walking stick rested beside her, and her head was tilted slightly upward, as if she was listening to the clouds. Her pale, milky eyes didn't move. They never did. Talia had been blind since birth, but even without her eyes, she had a way of seeing the world most people didn't. She knew when the wind was about to change. She could smell when someone had been crying. And tonight, in the middle of that raging storm, she heard footsteps, slow and heavy ones, walking toward her through the rain. Talia's heart skipped. No one ever walked in the rain like that. Most people rushed or ran. Most people complained, cursed, or hid under shop awnings. But this person, whoever he was, walked like he had nowhere to be and nothing to fear. "Hello," Talia called softly, clutching her cane. The footsteps stopped. The rain kept falling. "I can hear you," she said again, louder this time. "Do you need help?" Silence, then a voice low, raspy, and cautious. "I should be asking you that. You're the one sitting alone in the rain." Talia gave a small smile. "I'm waiting. For what?" She paused. "For something. I don't know what yet, but I'll know when it arrives." The stranger gave a short, quiet laugh. There was something sad in it. Something tired. "Strange girl, strange man," she replied, her voice calm. "You sound like you've been walking for a long time." "I have. Are you running from something?" Another pause. "Yes, that," made Talia's fingers tighten around her cane. Her chest stirred with curiosity, even as the storm picked up. "Are you dangerous?" she asked carefully, a longer silence this time. Then, "I used to be." Talia didn't flinch. Instead, she patted the wet space beside her. "Sit. If you're dangerous, at least we'll be even." "The world is dangerous too." He hesitated, then he sat. For a few seconds, they didn't speak. The only sounds were the rain tapping on rooftops and the distant rumble of thunder. "What's your name?" Talia finally asked. "Eli." "Just Eli?" "Just Eli," she nodded. "Well, I'm Talia." "Just Talia." Eli shifted beside her. "You're not afraid of strangers?" "I don't fear people," she said simply. "I fear what they carry in their hearts." Eli didn't respond to that. Talia turned her face toward him. "You've got something heavy in yours." He let out a deep breath. "You could say that." She smiled again. "Then you've come to the right place. I listen." Eli looked at her for a long time. Though she couldn't see him, she felt the weight of his stare. And for some reason, he did something he hadn't done in years. He talked. He told her bits and pieces. Not everything, just enough. He said he'd come from the north, that he'd lost something, that he didn't know where he was headed, that he had no family anymore, that people were looking for him, and not in a good way. Talia listened the way only someone who truly understood silence could, and when she asked, "Did you do something terrible?" Eli didn't deny it. He simply whispered, "Yes." The air felt colder then, but Talia didn't stand or step away. She only nodded, like she'd expected that answer all along. "You sound like someone who's sorry," she said. Eli chuckled bitterly. "I'm not sure sorry is enough. It never is. But it's a start." Suddenly, a sharp, cold wind rushed down the street, and the sound of sirens echoed faintly in the distance. Eli's entire body stiffened. He stood quickly. "I shouldn't have stopped here." Talia reached out, her hand brushing his coat. "Wait, I can't. There's a shed behind the library. No one uses it anymore. You can stay there for tonight." "The rain's only getting worse." He looked at her, stunned. "Why would you help me?" "Because no one helped my father when he needed it." That was all she said. And that was all it took. Eli vanished into the dark, moving the way only someone used to hiding could. A few minutes later, Talia heard the faint creak of the library's back gate. She waited until the wind calmed before she stood, gathered her things, and walked home through the rain. Every step she took felt heavier now, like something had changed, like her quiet, careful world had been pulled into a storm she couldn't see. The next morning, she returned. It was bright outside, the storm gone, and the air carried the smell of wet earth. Birds were chirping. The town felt normal again, but nothing about her felt normal. Talia walked behind the library and knocked gently on the shed door. Eli, she called. No answer. She opened it slowly. He was still there, huddled in the corner, wet, cold, and barely awake. His face was tired, his eyes bloodshot, but he looked at her like she was the sun itself. I brought you some bread, she said quietly, and tea. I didn't know if you liked sugar, so I brought honey. Eli stared at her, stunned. Then, his eyes watered, just a little. You really are strange. I've been told that before, she said with a grin. As he ate, Talia sat beside him again, and for a while, they said nothing, but in her heart, Talia felt something growing, a seed of something strange and dangerous and powerful, something she didn't yet have a name for. What she didn't know was that the man she had just saved wasn't just any man, he was someone who would change everything, a man with a secret, so big, so dangerous, that when the truth came out, the entire town of Elmridge would tremble, and the girl who couldn't see would become the only one who truly understood what had been hidden all along. The days passed slowly. Each morning, Talia returned to the shed behind the library with something warm in a basket: bread, fruit, tea, or whatever she could take without making her aunt suspicious. And each time she arrived, Eli was there, waiting in silence, always watching her with something unreadable in his eyes. He rarely spoke, but when he did, his voice was full of regret, of pain, of a man who had lived through things he wished he could erase. One morning, after handing him a bowl of warm porridge, Talia leaned against the wooden wall and asked, "Why are they chasing you?" Eli was quiet for a long time, then he answered, in a whisper, "Because they think I killed someone." The words hung in the air, sharp and cold. Talia didn't move. She didn't flinch, but her fingers tightened around the rim of her empty basket. "Did you?" she asked. He looked down at his hands. "I don't know anymore, but everyone believes I did." She turned her face toward him. "That's not an answer. I was set up," he said flatly. "But by the time I figured that out, it was too late. The police were at my door. I ran." Talia's voice was barely audible. "Who died?" "A senator," Eli said, pain flickering through his eyes. "Someone important." Talia felt her breath catch, not because of who it was, but because of how casually he said it. As if important people died every day and were replaced without warning. "They said I planted the bomb," he continued. "At a fundraiser, 27 people were injured. 3 died. One of them was my sister." Talia turned her face away. Her eyes, though blind, stung. "I'm sorry," she said softly. Eli nodded once. "She was the only person who believed in me, and I failed her." Talia's throat tightened. For a few minutes, neither of them spoke. The morning wind blew gently through the cracked wood, and somewhere in the distance, a church bell rang. Then she asked, "Why here? Why Elmridge?" "I don't know," Eli said. "Something pulled me this way. I've been walking for days. I didn't even know this town existed." Talia smiled faintly. "That's how most people feel when they find this place." Eli studied her, something shifting in his gaze. "Why are you helping me, Talia?" She hesitated. Then, "Because once someone helped me, and they didn't have to, but they did." Eli tilted his head. "Your father?" "No," she said, slowly. "A boy. When I was 12, I got lost during a storm. Everyone panicked, but this boy found me. He sat beside me in the rain and held my hand until someone came. I never saw his face, but I remembered his voice." She looked in Eli's direction. "You sound like him." Eli froze. "Talia," he said carefully. "What did the boy say?" "To you?" She smiled gently, her blind eyes glowing. He told me I would always find my way, that even without sight, I could see more than most. Eli swallowed hard. His face turned pale. What is it? She asked. He looked away. Nothing. Just coincidence. But it wasn't coincidence. Eli remembered that day. He remembered finding a little girl in the woods, her eyes full of fear, her face soaked from the rain. He'd been on the run even back then from a foster home, from an abusive uncle, from a world that never loved him. But that day, something had made him stop. He'd held her hand, and now she was here, helping him again. He hadn't recognized her at first. How could he? She was older now, her voice more steady, but her kindness hadn't changed, and that terrified him more than anything, because if she knew who he really was, if she knew what he'd done to survive after that night, she wouldn't be bringing him warm food and soft smiles. She'd run. Later that evening, Talia sat at the window of her small room, hands folded in her lap. Her aunt, Miss Doreen, was humming in the kitchen. The smell of yam porridge drifted through the house, but Talia couldn't eat. She kept thinking about Eli, about his voice, about his story. She didn't believe he was guilty. Not fully, not in the way everyone else might, but something didn't add up. She'd read about the bombing. Even without sight, Talia devoured audio news, radio shows, and interviews. It had happened 6 months ago in Grayston, a quiet town, just like Elmridge. The suspect had vanished, leaving behind no clue except a half-burned note in a hotel room. The media had called him the ghost bomber. Talia had never imagined she'd be feeding him porridge. She also hadn't imagined feeling safe beside him, but she did, and that scared her more than she was willing to admit. The next morning, Talia arrived at the shed and found the door wide open, empty. She froze. Eli, she called, her voice trembling. No answer. The basket in her hand dropped to the floor. The sound of it hitting the ground echoed too loudly. She stepped inside slowly, reaching forward, her fingers brushing the damp wooden walls. The mattress was still there, the cup she'd left yesterday, even the corner where she'd placed the small radio, but no Eli. Her heart pounded. And then, just as she turned to leave, she felt something beneath her foot, a piece of paper. She knelt, fingertips gliding over the smooth surface. Words were written in sharp, messy ink. She couldn't read it, but she knew someone who could. She folded it, slipped it into her pocket, and turned to leave. As she walked back toward town, she felt it in her bones. Something was coming, something dark, something dangerous, and whatever it was, Eli was walking straight into it. Meanwhile, miles away, Eli stood on the edge of a forest, staring at a tall wire fence. Beyond it was a large building with cameras, guards, and electric gates. He clenched his fists. This was where it all began. This was where he had been turned into a monster. He had to go back, to find the truth, to find him, the one who had ruined everything, the one whose name he couldn't say aloud, because if he did, he might not survive what came next. Talia didn't sleep that night. Her fingers kept brushing the folded paper in her pocket, over and over, like it held the answer to everything. The words weren't just scribbles, they were a goodbye, or a warning. She wasn't sure which one scared her more. The next morning, while Miss Doreen was folding laundry in the backyard, Talia crept out. She didn't use her usual walking stick this time. She moved by memory, by the familiar feel of gravel under her feet and the sound of birds near the bakery. Her steps led her to Mr. Quame's shop. He was a quiet, sharp man in his 60s who fixed broken radios and sold newspapers. But more than that, he knew how to keep a secret. Talia had trusted him since she was small. He looked up as she walked in. Talia, out this early? I need you to read something. He wiped his hands on a cloth and guided her to the counter. She handed him the paper. He unfolded it, eyebrows slowly drawing together. What is it? She asked softly. He cleared his throat. It says, "Don't come looking for me. They'll be watching you now too. Thank you for everything. I'll come back when it's safe. Eli, Talia's hands trembled slightly. Do you know who they are? She asked. Mr. Quame hesitated. There are always they, child. But lately, I've been hearing rumors. Talia leaned in. Tell me, last week a man came asking questions, he said. Tall for an accent, wore a black coat even in the heat. He showed a picture of someone, burned at the edges. Looked like he'd taken it from a fire. Was it Eli? I believe so. He didn't give a name. Just said he was looking for a criminal who betrayed the program. Talia frowned. What program? Mr. Quame hesitated, then lowered his voice. They say it was a secret facility, government-funded, off the books. Recruited orphans and street kids. Trained them to do things. Terrible things. Bombs. Surveillance. Silent. Kills. Talia's breath caught. And you think Eli was part of it? I think he's not who you think he is. Talia stood there, silent. Her hands clenched into fists. She had known he was hiding something, but not this. You said he might come back, Mr. Quame said gently. But if he does, so will the shadows following him. Be careful, Talia nodded slowly, then turned and left. As she walked back through the narrow streets of Elmridge, the air felt heavier, like the town itself was holding its breath. Hours away, in the woods behind the compound, Eli was crawling on his stomach through wet leaves. He had changed. The soft kindness he'd shown with Talia was gone, replaced with a hard, cold focus. His eyes scanned the terrain. His mind was sharp, calculating. Each movement was silent, rehearsed. He remembered this place. He remembered being locked in a room, forced to solve puzzles that triggered real consequences. He remembered his friend, Jonah, screaming. He remembered the voice over the intercom. Pain teaches clarity. He clenched his jaw. He had survived that place, barely. Now he was back. Not to kill, but to find proof. Someone had set him up. Someone still inside. His name was Damian Wexler, the one who wore a polished smile and a quiet voice. The man who had called them soldiers of the invisible war, the man who had sacrificed children for his experiments. Eli reached the back fence. There was still a blind spot between two cameras. He slid a folded photo from his pocket. It was old and creased, showing 5 teenagers, himself, Jonah, Liana, Mateo, and someone else with their face scratched out. Only 2 of them were still alive. Eli needed answers. He needed justice. And deep down, he knew he needed Talia, because her voice still echoed in his mind. Her calm belief, her quiet strength, even when he didn't believe in himself. She had, but bringing her into this darkness would destroy her, and he couldn't let that happen. That night, Talia sat outside, on her porch, listening to the sounds of the town. A truck rumbled in the distance. A dog barked twice. Someone was humming a hymn nearby. And then she heard it, the slow, careful steps of someone trying not to be noticed. Her heart raced. She stood quickly, walking toward the gate. Who's there? She called. No answer. But then, just before she turned back, a small object hit the ground near her feet. She bent, fingers tracing its shape. A phone, old, scratched but warm. Someone had just used it. She held it close and walked inside, locking the door behind her. Later, in her room, she plugged it in. A message popped up on the screen. Only one. A video. She pressed play. The image was grainy, but the audio was clear. It showed a dark room. A man in a lab coat. Another boy, Eli, younger, thinner, bruised, strapped to a chair. A voice spoke off camera. Do you understand what happens if you fail again, 11? Yes, Eli whispered. I understand. The video cut off. Talia sat frozen. 11. That had been his name there. Not Eli. 11. A number, not a boy. She covered her mouth, tears spilling down her cheeks. Whatever Eli had survived, it was worse than anything she'd imagined. And someone out there didn't want the truth known. Elsewhere, in a tall black SUV parked just outside Elmridge, a man in a black coat watched the town through tinted glass. He held a photo in his hand. Talia's face. Target confirmed. he said into the earpiece. The blind girl has made contact. Proceed with caution. She's not to be harmed. Unless necessary. Behind him, another figure stirred. I want him alive, the voice said. But if she gets in the way. The sentence was left unfinished, but the message was clear. War was coming to Elmridge, and Talia, the blind girl with too much heart, was now a threat. The sky over Elmridge darkened earlier than usual. Storm clouds, thick and brooding, gathered above the town like an omen. The wind rustled the trees with a whispering urgency, and the air carried the scent of coming rain. But inside the small house on Lily Street, Talia didn't notice the change in weather. She was sitting at her desk, earbuds in her ears, listening to the video again, and again. Each time, she pressed pause on a different second, rewinding, repeating, looking for something she couldn't see but somehow felt. She had grown up blind, yes, but she had also grown up sharp. While others relied on sight, Talia learned to trust rhythm, tone, and background hums. She could hear tension in a voice, lies in a breath, and something in that video, something small, kept pulling at her mind like a thread. She turned up the volume and listened carefully to the background. Not the voice, not Eli's breathing, the background. There it was, a faint ticking, steady, metallic, almost like, she gasped, a clock, not digital, analog, and then something else faint, but clearer now that she knew what to look for. A bell, not a regular bell, but the high, distinct chime of a freight elevator. There weren't many places in Elmridge or even nearby that had both an analog clock and a freight elevator. She opened her laptop, guided by muscle memory and her screen reader. Her fingers flew over the keys as she searched for old factory blueprints, decommissioned military sites, or abandoned facilities in our past. Then another, and then there it was, a textile plant, shut down 10 years ago after a fire. Located in Hollow Ridge about 30 minutes from Elmridge, reported to have underground storage, old equipment, and a freight lift that had been installed in the 80s. Her fingers trembled as she typed the coordinates into her recorder. She was getting closer to Eli, to the truth, but someone else was watching. From across the street, a camera lens clicked quietly behind a drawn curtain. A man in a black jacket lowered the binoculars and pressed a button on his earpiece. She's onto something, he said. She's smarter than we thought, a voice crackled back. Do not engage. The girl is a witness. Let's find 11 first. The man nodded, but as he turned away from the window, he muttered, too late for that, because just an hour later, Talia's front door creaked open without a sound, and a shadow slipped inside. Meanwhile, Eli crouched beneath the cracked floorboards of the old textile plant. Dust covered everything. Rats scurried nearby, and the air smelled like mold, rust, and old secrets. He had found the room. It was deeper than he remembered. The old facility's underground level had been sealed, but he knew the weak spots. He'd torn through the boards, crawled through duct vents, and found the door they once dragged him through every week for training. It was still there, and it was unlocked. Inside, nothing had changed. The chair, the restraints, the flickering light bulb, and on the table beside it files. He grabbed them and began to flip through. Experiment 11. Behavioral conditioning subject. Elijah Rowe age. 15 objective. High-risk adaptability. Emotional suppression. Tactical enhancement. Outcome. Unstable. Terminated from program. Escaped. There were pictures, scans of brain waves, mission reports, places he'd been sent as a teen, names he didn't recognize, towns that burned after he left them, and then a name that made his stomach drop, Project Mirror. Subject 13. He turned the page. A girl, blind, brilliant, raised in Elmridge, no record of parents, status, unaware of identity, monitored closely. Eli's blood ran cold. No, it couldn't be. Not her, not Talia. She was never supposed to be involved. He read the next line. 13 has demonstrated unexplained perception, emotional manipulation potential. High potential for awakening dormant memory link with subject 11. Confirmed. Memory link. That's why she had felt familiar. That's why she remembered him. And that's why they were watching her. He ran, bursting out of the underground, tearing through the rotting hallway, into the woods, back to Elmridge, to her. But he was too late. Talia's house was eerily silent when he arrived. The front door was ajar. Eli stepped inside slowly, his breath shallow. "Talia," he called. Nothing. The kitchen light was still on. Her cane was by the door. Her tea mug was half finished on the counter. But she was gone. His chest tightened, his fists clenched, and then he saw it, the message scrawled on the wall in thick red ink. "Come alone, or she disappears forever." Attached below it was a photo, Talia blindfolded, hands bound, sitting in a cold metal chair. Eli tore the photo from the wall. His mind went quiet, not with fear, but with fire. Whoever had taken her, they had no idea who they were dealing with. He was done hiding, done running. He would burn the whole program down if he had to. Because they had taken the only person who had ever seen him as more than a weapon, and they would regret it, all of them, somewhere underground. Talia sat motionless in the chair. The blindfold was tight, and her wrists ached, but she wasn't afraid. Not anymore. She remembered the voice she'd heard years ago during the storm, the boy who held her hand and whispered, "You will always find your way." She didn't know how or when, but she knew Eli was coming, and when he did, everything would change. Because the blind girl who once helped a stranger was about to learn that stranger was never really a stranger at all. The air in the underground facility was cold and metallic. The silence was alive, buzzing with tension, thick with secrets. Talia sat tied to the same kind of chair Eli had once been strapped into, her blindfold soaking up the sweat on her forehead. She didn't cry, not once. She knew Eli was coming. Somehow, deep in her chest, she felt the same strange pull she had felt when he first sat beside her in the rain. The same pull she had felt at 12, when a boy held her hand in a storm. That boy was coming, and he wasn't afraid anymore. Above ground, thunder cracked again. But there was no rain, only the sound of footsteps against old concrete. Moving fast, calculated, quiet, Eli had returned to the place where it all began. But this time, he wasn't the boy they created. He was the man they feared, dressed in black, armed with only a crowbar and knowledge of every hallway. He moved through the corridors like a ghost. He knew their systems, their blind spots, and the 2-second lag between camera resets. As he turned a corner, 2 guards appeared. Before they could raise their weapons, Eli struck, swift, brutal, silent. They dropped to the floor unconscious. He pressed forward, guided by memory and a single goal. Talia, in the control room, Damien Wexler, the man who created Project Mirror, watched Eli on a split screen. His gray eyes were calm, lips pressed into a thin line. "He's here," said the younger agent behind him. "Let him come," Wexler said coldly. "He'll come straight to her, and when he does, we end this." "What about Subject 13? Wexler's eyes narrowed. She was never meant to remember, but now that she has, she's a liability. He tapped his desk. "Kill switch is ready." In the cell below, Talia sat still, listening. Her world was dark, always had been, but she had learned to read sound like others read books. And right now, her senses told her everything she needed to know. Footsteps were coming, fast, familiar. She turned her head. "Eli," she whispered. The door burst open, and there he was. He didn't speak. He rushed to her, yanked the blindfold off, untied her wrists, and held her close for a single, shaking moment. "I'm here," he breathed. "I'm sorry." Talia clung to his coat. "I knew you'd come." He pulled back and cupped her face. "You were part of it too," he said, voice trembling. "Project Mirror. They've been watching you your whole life." Talia nodded. "I know now, but I'm not afraid." He looked down. "We need to go. There is a kill switch. They're planning to wipe this whole place out." Suddenly, bang, the wall behind them exploded. Eli shielded Talia with his body as dust and fire filled the air. Men stormed in, guns, masks, orders on the ground. One barked. Eli stood slowly. Talia gripped his hand tightly, but before the men could fire, a blinding flash went off behind them. Mr. Quaim stood at the entry with a military-grade flash bomb in his hand, eyes blazing. "I told you to be careful, child," he shouted. Eli gasped. "How did you? Let's just say I know more than I let on," Quaim said, pulling them out through a hidden tunnel as gunfire broke behind them. "This facility has been illegal for years. I've been waiting for someone brave enough to help shut it down." Eli guided Talia through the tunnel, past metal beams and decades-old wiring, into fresh night air. They ran, into the forest, into the open, and into the truth. 1 week later, the world changed. Project Mirror was exposed. A whistleblower released the files. News stations exploded with coverage. Wexler was arrested. Survivors of the program stepped forward, some still children, others hiding as adults. Talia became the face of the story, not because she was a victim, but because she had helped the most dangerous fugitive in the country and discovered he was never dangerous at all. Eli was cleared of all charges. The bombing, staged by Wexler to eliminate whistleblowers. Eli had tried to stop it, but no one believed him, except a blind girl who listened and gave him a second chance. Now, weeks later, they sat together at the very same library steps where it all began. Talia leaned her head against Eli's shoulder. "Did you ever think it would end like this?" she asked. "No," Eli said. "I didn't even think I'd survive." "You did more than survive." He turned to her, his voice soft. "You saved me, Talia. In more ways than one," she smiled, fingers brushing his hand. "You saved me first, a long time ago, in a storm." He laughed gently. "We've always been saving each other, haven't we?" She nodded. "That's what love is." He stared at her, quiet for a long time. Then he took her hand, kissed her knuckles, and said, "I may be a ghost in the eyes of the world, but to you, I'll always be real, and to me," she whispered, "you'll always be the boy who saw me before I ever saw myself." And as the wind blew gently through Elmridge, the blind girl and the man with a shattered past sat in peace, finally free, not just from the program, but from fear, from silence, from the lie that broken people can't be whole again, because sometimes the most powerful kind of light is found in the dark.